Chapter 1. Changing the World One Muslin Wrap at a Time. As you read this, a swaddled baby is sleeping soundly in Sydney, another is letting out a drowsy sigh in London, and a third is cooing before drifting into a long slumber in New York. Today, infants around the world are being coaxed into a restful sleep in much the same way babies were ushered to sleep in ancient Rome, Greece, Egypt, and China. They are being swaddled snugly, wrapped in a blanket until their bodies resemble an oversized cocoon, and lulled to sleep feeling safe, secure, and comfortable. I believe that all babies like to be swaddled. If you don't believe me, then think back to the first peek at a hospital nursery. There in silent slumber were dozens of newborns of all shapes and sizes from all different backgrounds, all starting out life in the same way, wrapped up as tight little bundles of joy. Swaddling replicates a universal feeling of security that all babies recognise. In other words, swaddling works because it feels good and familiar. In fact, many experts believe that swaddling reproduces the snug, calming environment of the womb, which is in sharp contrast to the noisy, bright, wide-open world into which babies are thrust at birth. What a way to enter the world, via shock therapy. Some psychologists claim that being born could very well be one of the most traumatic experiences in a person's life. Think about the transition involved in birth. Tiny newborns are yanked from a blissful state inside the womb where everything they could possibly want is provided without asking, and any shock is immediately absorbed and diffused by a mother's body. Compare that environment to the chaos we know as life, where the first order of business for babies is to gasp for air as they emerge from the womb. It's no wonder babies want to get back to the security of a swaddle. Babies aren't the only ones feeling uneasy when it comes to birth. First-time mums and mums of 3, 4 and more children all feel the pressure of parenthood. When I fell pregnant for the first time, I remember feeling snowed under by advice and inundated by facts and figures from experts and veteran mums, until I felt like my head would explode. When Anais was born, I was petrified and tired and overworked and stressed out, and my first baby had only been on the planet for 72 hours. What was life going to be like when I brought her home and it was just 3 first-timers, my husband, my baby, and moi? I was sure I was ill-equipped for motherhood and believed that everyone knew more and was better at child-rearing than I was. One day I felt I wasn't reading enough, the next day I felt like I was reading too much. I was taking advice from everyone who offered it, my family, friends, doctors, nurses, and lactation consultants. I was desperate for guidance, but suffering from information overload. During that time, I would have stood on my head and sung Ba Ba Black Sheep if someone had told me it would help get my life back. In all honesty, I'm tired just thinking about that time of my life. My point is this: I've been in your shoes, or your old tracky pants as the case may be, and I survived. I believe a big part of what got me through the transition to motherhood was swaddling. I know that every mum and every baby is different, but I truly believe that the comfort and security babies feel when they are swaddled is universal. More importantly, when your baby slips into a restful full night's sleep, you can do the same. All my daughters were sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night by the time they were 12 weeks old, and I know their good sleep habits had a lot to do with the swaddling. The most important thing to remember about swaddling is that it's not difficult. It just requires a little time and patience to become comfortable with the technique. A happily swaddled baby does not have to involve Velcro fasteners or a series of complex folds and tucks, which is what some books and professionals claim. It is much simpler than that. Keep in mind that swaddling is not about precision, but rather it's about establishing a bedtime routine for your baby. It is also a time to relax and enjoy your baby's company, not something to dread. Again, the key to the entire experience is to keep the bedtime swaddling ritual consistent, so it eventually becomes a sleep trigger for your baby after a few weeks. It's also important to start swaddling your little one as soon as he or she comes home, because being wrapped will be a familiar feeling. Nurses and midwives swaddle newborn babies immediately after they are born. And since babies love and thrive on routine, a snug, familiar wrap will help them adjust to their new surroundings. The bedtime swaddling ritual I used was pretty straightforward. After feeding my daughters half their milk, I'd bathe them and dry them, bring them to their room to put on their nappy and dress them in their pyjamas. Next, I'd dim the lights and give them a second half of their milk whilst my sound machine played a lullaby. I would burp them, swaddle them, tell them that I love them, and then change the sound machine to the white noise setting and place them in their cot to sleep. Always remember to place your baby to sleep on his or her back to make sure their breathing is not impaired. I started off with the basic swaddle and moved to the Aussie swaddle when the girls reached about 3 months. The Aussie swaddle gives babies the room to bring their hands up near their face in case the babies want to suck on their fists and fingers as they drift off to sleep. Sucking is a self-soothing reaction for most babies. However, reaching for a block of Jacques Torres chocolate is mine. By repeating the ritual religiously every night at the same time for about 6 weeks, the swaddling became a true sleep trigger. My daughters welcomed the feeling of being wrapped and responded to it as a cue to relax their little minds and bodies and drift off to a peaceful sleep. Soon after that, I was able to use the swaddle to comfort my babies when they were overtired and cranky, or out of sorts because they were off their normal schedule. The swaddle was also a signal to my babies that it was time for a nap. Some babies will take to their parents' swaddling ritual straight away, while others will fuss until the swaddle feels right. My swaddling recipe always included using a wrap made of lightweight fabric so the baby did not overheat, and one that was large enough to securely swaddle the girls. I always like wraps that are more than 44 inches square. Also, the fabric had to have a slight stretch quality to it so the swaddle was tight but not restrictive. I know what you're thinking. The description of my swaddling blanket sounds a lot like a shameless plug for Aden and anais products, but it really is the other way around. I advocate the use of muslin swaddling blankets not because I sell them, but rather I sell them because I wouldn't think of using anything else on my babies. And I'm not the only one who swears by muslin. When I had my second daughter Lourdes, we had just received our first prototype of the blanket. I took the newly minted swaddles with me to the hospital so I could wrap Lulu in the muslin from day one. But by the time I was ready to bring her home, the muslin wraps had disappeared. It turns out the maternity nurses were absconding with the swaddles because the muslin wraps work better than the hospital-issued blankets. That's when I cut a deal with the nurses. I said, spread the word and you can keep the wraps.